Peace and love, you magnificent miracles with a spiritual level of being. Nathan here from a spiritual level of being. You have a spiritual level of being. And today we're going to be diving in deep. We're going to be discussing the Hyksos, the Canaanites, the Israelites, Exodus, and the pharaohs of Egypt that were contributed to the tales that we see in the Bible. Now, there's no Egyptian records of Moses or the Israelites fleeing out of Egypt in mass numbers, such in the case of Exodus. This made historians realise that there were no Israelites in Egypt, rather they were rural Canaanites living in remote areas that never left the Levant. Now, there certainly were Israelites that travelled and worked in Egypt, but certainly not in the cases such as Exodus. Now, there were records in Egypt of the Hyksos being persecuted and fleeing Egypt. Now, the Hyksos is a Greek version of an Egyptian title meaning rulers of foreign land or rulers of hill countries. They end up becoming the 15th dynastic rulers of Egypt, and they were, well, pretty much kicked out of Egypt, though not all the people were. They were a Canaanite people who lived 500 years before the arrival of the Israelites in Canaan. Now, the Hyksos were an Asiatic people, deriving out of Asia, just like the Israelites. They temporarily stayed and fled Egypt, just like the Israelites. They lived in the same houses, the same cities, the same communities as the Israelites. They had the same amount of power as the Israelites stated in the Bible. They were also persecuted and fled Egypt. They were persecuted by Ahmose I. Now, the story of Jacob being the advisor of the Pharaoh. This can be attributed to two men. Uya, who was the father of sorry if I butchered the name, who was the mother of Akhenaten, the wife of Amenhotep. He was the brother-in-law to Amenhotep through marriage. Now, Uya was a counselor of the Pharaoh and also known as the second prophet of Amun. Now, I would rather go with the case of Apparel, also written as Aperia, which means servant of the god El, a Canaanite. And El, being a Canaanite god, would later be the father of Yahweh. Now, Apparel, sorry if I butchered the name, he was a foreigner, Canaanite, and he held the highest official rank serving the Pharaoh. His offspring, three male heirs, one would become the ruler of the chariots in the army, and the other would be a high priest. He served both Amenhotep III, the Great, and also Akhenaten. Now, Amenhotep also had a son called Tutmosis, or Tutmos, which would also be contributed into the tale of Moses, but it's mostly Akhenaten. As Akhenaten brought forth the idea of one God, he didn't invent it. He went through earlier Egyptian records, and his idea was to bring back a more enlightened, spiritual, individual path to religion. And he went through the older records of Ra, bringing back a male-female aspect of Ra called Aten. Now, it was dualistic in nature, both masculine and feminine. Now, Akhenaten wanted to remove the role of the high priest, which was very corrupt. He wanted to bring forth this idea of one God and a separate path, so an individual path for the people. Instead of having to go and see all these different gods and all these different priests, rather, you had your own personal path. Now, he was also seen as a prophet in the Druze religion, which is an offshoot of Islam and the Aramaic faiths. Now, Akhenaten brought forth his idea of this new universal religion without violence, as many other religions did use violence to spread their faiths and control the population. Akhenaten was not about this. He was more for an enlightened age, an age of learning and spirituality. Now, after his death, some of the supporters of Atenism were also persecuted by, sorry if I butchered his name, Horemheb, who was a pharaoh of Egypt, and he persecuted these rebels that would flee across the Red Sea. And this is where you have the tale of the Red Sea parting. So all of these little stories have been told in oral tradition, retold and retold about the Canaanites leaving Egypt, and it's been told in a state of religion that we now see today. So all these ideas of oral faiths, or oral traditions I should say, have impacted today's religions. So peace and love everyone, I love you all, connect to one, mind and soul. Namaste.